Nikki Chooi, it's so great to have you on the show.
Great to have me. How are you, Renee?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you. I'm excited to have this conversation with you today. We've known each other many years. I've met you, I think, first time when you were on tour with the NAC Orchestra performing a
Yes.
Beethoven concerto, and you were just
Yes.
fantastic. And since then, you've had quite an amazing journey. So let's start there. Please tell us about
Sure.
your musical journey, how that path unfolded for you.
Sure. And yes, we do go all the way back. Good memories from that tour with the NAC. Um, so yeah, I was born and raised in Victoria, British Columbia. My parents were non-musical. My dad works with in the computer field, and my mom, she did math for her at university. So music was something completely foreign. And when I was growing up, they wanted me to be exposed to a lot of different things. So, sports, I played baseball, gymnastics, a bit of soccer, and music, they were just one of many things I was part of. But early on, music kind of stepped forward as something that I was most interested in and also just had a knack for it, right? So, I progressed pretty fast and that gave me a lot of motivation and encouragement. And my Suzuki teacher back then was really supportive and really pushed me in a healthy way in which I had interest, but also had motivation to kind of keep forward. So
Mm.
yeah, so that's how I started, and one thing led to another, and I attended the Starling Delay Symposium program at the Juilliard School when I was 14 years old. And that was my first time in being in a city like New York City, right? So I got really excited. I met Itzhak Perlman, Don Weilerstein was there, David Kim, and Akiko Meyer. So just, blockbuster names and people I only heard on recordings, and I remember telling my dad who went with me in that program, I was like, I don't want to leave. I want to stay here forever. So yeah, so that I would say that was the turning point around 13, 14. I was like, okay, I want to do this for the rest of my life. So yeah.
That's amazing. And you did.
Yes. Yes.
Nikki, I have so many specific questions because I get the same thing over and over from the listeners. People are so fascinated in, musicians such as yourself that have achieved so many great accomplishments in their career. They're so fascinated by the practicing process, the performance preparation process, how to practice musicality, things like this. So if that's
Sure.
okay with you, I'm going to pull these questions and start down the list.
Sure.
One question that I get from listeners all the time: what what do you go to when you're trying to learn a particularly difficult passage? What is your approach?
Um, Let me think. I would say, let's say for example, Heldenleben. We'll be playing this in a couple weeks here in Buffalo, and there's obviously some, there's standards, the solo passages that everybody's prepared for auditions, but there are other passages where there's it's tricky as well, right?
Yeah.
So for me, how I start on those passages is to kind of play it at a medium tempo, just try to see what naturally fits as a fingering, not be married to a fingering yet,
Mm.
and to see what falls naturally on my hand. For example, sometimes it's a three, sometimes it's a four, a fourth finger, a shift, and what falls naturally on the hand. I give myself, if I were to do it properly, I would start several weeks before just to get a head start on it and find what's comfortable. I would give myself maybe I would say 3 to 4 practice sessions, just feeling what's natural. Then I would decide on a fingering that's most consistent and also most, I guess, it makes sense musically. For example, staying on the same string and shifting where it makes sense musically as well. Then I would kind of break it down and like really, practice it in slow motion, try to get a feel for it, from a microscopic level. And then once I get that feeling, I actually push it up to a medium tempo and actually a fast tempo. And so practicing it fast is just as crucial as practicing it slow, I think, because you use a lot of different muscles, your reflexes are different, and whereas slow practice gets you to feel all the micro moments, the fast practice gets you to feel the overall picture. So let's say something happens, you're able to kind of get yourself back on track. Without fast practice, I found it really hard to do that. But you still need to still practice to kind of get the details in. Does that answer your question?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I love that you're trying to see what comes naturally first. I
Yeah.
feel like something I see a lot of times is people grab the music and right away try to figure out the fingering from the get-go, and then
Yeah.
you pin yourself kind of in a corner.
Yeah.
And it's a similar approach to what I do, which is like what comes naturally, what fits the musicality. And I love that you're saying you give yourself 3 to 4 practice sessions to
Yeah.
do that.
Same thing with bowings too, because as part of the role as a concertmaster, you gotta deal with figure out bowings. And the tricky thing about it is we have to prepare so much in advance. For me, naturally, I kind of evolve my bowing decisions as I get to know the piece, or it sometimes just changes over time, right? So again, I like to do you just kind of play around with it, what's natural before making a set decision. And then as the rehearsals go by, if something doesn't feel natural, obviously I'll change it as well. So I like to go with what's natural first and see if that's something I can stick with. So
Mm.
yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I love that. And I love what you underline in terms of slow practice is important, but so is fast practice.
Yeah. That's something I actually learned. I wouldn't say it's recent, but I guess much further into my it's something that I incorporate much later in my practice routine, definitely after school, after I finished formal school training and kind of figure out, those were actually crucial years, right after school. So I did my bachelor's at Curtis, master's at Juilliard, and the time in between was when I actually kind of figure out, kind of took all the information I got from my teachers, even from high school, and then kind of made it my own, just figure out what works, what doesn't, how can I teach myself now? Now I'm my own teacher, and those were actually very enlightening years for me. So knowing what works for my body, what doesn't, even though teachers might have advised this or that's the traditional way to do it, I had to kind of figure out what works and what doesn't. So yeah,
I love that period. It's such an important one to build self-trust in our own
totally.
decisions.
Yeah.
You're very busy. You're a concertmaster in Buffalo. You also are now the new concertmaster in the Santa Fe Opera, which is so exciting.
Yeah.
And you travel a lot for solo recitals. You just recorded a concerto. I want us to talk about all of these amazing things later. But you talked about giving yourself 3 to 4 practice sessions to explore
Hmm.
bowings, fingerings. But how about the time frame that you usually like? And I know it changes from, you know, project to project, but
Yep.
how
Yep.
long do you work on pieces and how do you approach breaking down the work? And it's going to be different between orchestra, solo, all of this. But anyway.
Sure. Again, it's no, that's a great question because I love not love, but it fascinates me to just kind of figure out, kind of unlock, little bits of myself, just knowing myself a little bit better on what I need, what I like to do, and kind of marry the two. For example, what I mean by that is, what do I need for, let's say preparing to perform Mendelssohn Violin Concerto, something that I know very well. I learned it when I was 12. And I've played it many times since. But what do I need it? Let's say, so I played it 2 weeks ago. How much in advance do I need to prepare for it? For something that I know very well, I would say it's more useful to kind of practice in spurts. So let's say just after Christmas, I would spend maybe half a week on just getting through all the movements, pick different spots and maybe play through a movement or two. And then I would revisit it at the end of January and again in February. And then the couple of weeks leading up to it, that's when I kind of put it into full gear because, I know it really well. Um, let's say the Beza Ranchbaran concerto that was new to me. That's the one I recorded earlier in April. It's a concerto I've never played before, so that one I had to take a lot more time. So I had played it in Rochester back in October, but before that, I had almost a year with the score. Not necessarily practicing or playing it, but just kind of living and breathing a little bit, just having it with me, just kind of looking at it and just kind of imagine, the sound world, the I guess, how it kind of fits with the orchestra, the rhythm, the passages, and just filling around with it and not so much deliberate practice. That kind of came at a later time. So that's how I would approach a newer, concerto. As with like symphonic works, let's say, I don't know, something that's big. Let's talk about Heldenleben again. So obviously, I know the solo passages and all that, and I've played the whole thing before, but just getting to be familiarizing with it, I would say, and getting the bowings in order. I started that process in January, February around that, and just kind of just living and breathing it again. So again, like you said, it differs from work to work, right? And then stuff like so. Next week I'll be playing Bach double with my brother, and we've played Bach double many times. So we're gonna rehearse it, a couple of days before. It'll be just fine. So
Yeah.
yeah,
It's funny because I feel that people really want to know what is the specific system to do that. And I mean, I know how I operate as a
yeah,
musician and talking with you and everybody else. It's one more time I want to reiterate that it really is the system that you come up with for yourself, right? It's
exactly.
looking at your experience, your knowledge of the piece, how long it takes you to learn things, and having I mean, to go back to this word again, this self-trust of
Yep.
sort of having a theory of what could work and just getting started and see
Yeah.
if you need to tweak along the way. I don't know. Would you say I'm right
No, no,
about this?
I think you nailed it because it's more like having a plan, but also being open for the plan to evolve in a way that, whatever happens, right? That helps it excel, hopefully. And you're totally right. And, like there's no specific formula that works because it might have worked one way in the past, but you as a person, your environment, everything about it is constantly evolving, right? So it might work in the past, you probably have to tweak it a little bit in the future because life changes and
Yeah.
you change as a person, and so you got to be adaptable to that. I think being adaptable is really important. I think that's the key word. So yeah.
What you just said makes me think of something I'd be very curious to hear you speak about is being adaptable, we change. And these two auditions that you took, Buffalo and Santa Fe, were,
Yep.
apart in years. You've evolved, you've learned. What was different between the process and what is, you would say, maybe your current approach to audition preparation?
Ah, I would say, I mean, audition preparation is just like, I would say it's just like preparing for anything else, I think the only difference is that it's in very short spurts, and the range, I guess the selections is a lot. So an abundance of, different works. So you got to be, I guess quick to switch from one style to another, from one composer to another, from one period to another, right? So I would say the preparation and difficult passages, decisions on bowings, fingerings, all remain constant between preparing for excerpts versus preparing anything else that you're playing. But I would say the mental approach to being able to kind of execute on the spot with very little runway to get yourself there,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, for example, if you're playing, I don't know, Tchaikovsky concerto, you have the tutti, you have, a nice opening to, then you kind of settle into the theme and then you get to the hard spots. Sometimes, but with extras, you just start there. So you gotta, you know, be in a mindset and train yourself in that mindset to be able to suddenly boom, right? So yeah.
What does that look like for you? This mindset, this mental approach, the preparation.
The preparation for the mindset, I would say just constant repetition and meaning like just repeating the situation as much as possible. So let's say I'm preparing for an audition and I want to train myself to be able to play X excerpt. So sometimes I would just pick up my violin randomly and just play it or play it for people a number of times and just be in an unnatural, uncomfortable position for you to be able to execute those excerpts.
Hmm.
So that when the audition does come and it might be uncomfortable, but you're already comfortable with that discomfort.
Yeah,
So yeah.
that's what I call
Yeah.
adversity training.
Yeah. Yeah. So you kind of go a little bit further than, what you might need to deal with, but then you never know, right? You might have to that training might be helpful in some way or another.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think, yeah,
But then
I
yeah.
think in all the ways, yes.
Yeah, yeah. But then sometimes it doesn't work. So, you try again, you find another method. So I'm not saying that this is the way to do it, but I found it helpful in some ways. And of course, there's other things that, might happen that you might not be prepared for, and you just kind of learn along the way and just try better the next time. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
This is kind of bringing me back to what you talked about, that period right after school and when we build that, you know, our new footing, that self-trust. And I find that this is a moment that a lot of people have a hard time maneuvering. There's so much information out there. Oh my gosh, YouTube, Google, TikTok,
yep,
Instagram. There's, all these other wonderful platforms. There's people like me
yeah,
teaching.
yeah,
Um, and I find that people are often looking outside of themselves for all of the answers. And while information is great, sometimes it's difficult to find your own voice in there. What would you say to these young people coming out of school, trying to find their footing, starting on that professional journey? Um,
yeah.
how does one go about, letting go of the dependence on our teacher's advice or outside sources' advice?
Yeah, yeah. No, that's like you said, it's a journey, and for me, it's fascinating because like um, first of all, I guess if you have an abundance of information, that's actually a resource, right? You don't have to invent the wheel from the ground up. You can maybe take one method and kind of personalize it to your own liking or combine several methods. It doesn't have to be one way. But I guess the most important thing is again being adaptable. And if it doesn't work, you almost have to face the mirror and kind of tell yourself it's time to change it up a little bit. But again, there's a fine line between changing it up constantly because you need to try a few times, like kind of double down on something and to figure out if it's for you or not, because you need a little bit of time to do that. So yeah, so there's a fine line on, and again, it's just learning about yourself. Right? I just want to maybe give an example of, let's say, a fingering that or something that I'm working on. If I'm doing a fingering and I can't nail it in like 4 or 5 tries, I gotta switch it. Like
Hmm.
switch it, try something else, and maybe go back to it. So for me, like doing it over and over, if it still doesn't work, there's a a constant evolving process about it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, whether you get back to it eventually because you've tried different ways, and maybe have a fresh perspective, or maybe I have to move my elbow a little bit, help from the shoulder, but you gotta move on from that and try different ways and then come back to it. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I like that word that you're using, adaptable.
yeah,
It's like a
yeah.
scientific method, just,
Yeah.
develop a hypothesis, experiment, and then
Yeah. Yeah.
tweak if
Yeah.
necessary. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I don't know. For me, I think the whole thing, life in general, you're able to look at it objectively. The whole thing is a process, right?
Mhm.
It's not about just, winning this job or or playing this concerto well or doing this or that, even though those might be milestones in your life, but at the same time, it's in the grand scheme of things, it's how you kind of, see the life in general. It's a whole process too. So
Mm,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I really
So,
like that.
yeah.
How about musicality? How do you work on that? How do you develop your voice as you're working on repertoire?
Sure, sure, sure. Um, how do I develop my voice? Are you talking about like solo repertoire in general, like or orchestral, or preparing for excerpts? Because
Yeah,
I
or
can go into very different, like the topic is very broad.
no,
The
all of
different.
it. Why not?
Yeah.
All of them. Because I think
Yeah.
a question I get a lot is, you hear people say, it just never sounds exactly the way I have it in my head. Or
Hmm.
people feel that maybe the depth of emotions that they're feeling does
Yeah.
not quite translate on the instrument. So that's a question I get a lot. How do I practice musicality?
I practice musicality. Um, hmm. For me, musicality is more of a it's a more of a mindful approach. There's a way of phrasing, a way of I guess approaching, harmonic changes, approaching rhythm a certain way. To me, that's musicality.
Hmm.
Um, let's say if you're performing and there's emotion to it, that's more of a, there's a plan to it. There's but there's also an X factor where it happens kind of, spontaneously on stage. So I try to differentiate the two, like when I'm in my practice room and trying to figure out, let's say, a slow movement of a Mozart concerto, and to really be convincing with the line, the phrasing, and how much, how warm the vibrato should be, and that to me is kind of, there's a planning to it that kind of goes into it, and then hopefully, I've gotten into my system enough that when I play it in the performance, obviously you still need practice with it, maybe kind of practice performing it a few times to kind of let it all go and
Mm,
just kind of feel the music simultaneously as you play it. Right. So there's again, there's a process in that too. You practice, you figure it out, and you practice performing it, and then you actually perform it. So there's three stages to that. Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
also that
Yeah. Yeah.
quality of attention in the moment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that when you're actually performing, you're able to feel, but also be in control. Because sometimes, I've had moments where maybe I've been working too much on, I guess, the emotional, spontaneous side of things, which doesn't mean it's spontaneous anymore because you're working on it, right? But kind of just, having too much fun practicing sometimes. And then in the on stage, it kind of falls apart because I'm not in control. So, you need the control to be able to be expressive. And then when you're able to, again, combine the two, that's when, good things happen.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
I love what you just said there too, because that's one thing that I think people separate sometimes is they feel that the expression for lack of a better word, I'm not really sure how to put into words, but it feels it comes straight from their heart to their instrument.
Yeah,
And what I like to say is, well, hold on, there's kind of a few steps in between there where
yeah,
there's,
yeah,
if you're a wind player, there's the technical abilities you have with airflow and
yeah,
air support. And if
yeah,
you're a violinist or, a string player, then bow technique is very important. And
yeah,
as you said earlier, choice of vibrato, how wide, well, am I using vibrato? If
yeah,
so, how wide, how fast, where into the note? Like, there's all of these decisions that we can make ahead of time combined with really good technique and a continuation of building more and more skill on an instrument.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then yes, it goes from the heart to the
yeah,
instrument, but it
right.
goes through this filter of skills and technique.
Yeah,
Absolutely. The
yeah. Another,
control.
yeah, exactly. Another thing, what you had mentioned earlier was you mentioned that some people might have difficulty in translating emotions. They feel it, but then it doesn't sound. And I think sometimes when you feel something, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually doing it?
Hmm.
And I think that's where the control comes in because you got to figure out, okay, this is, to pretty basic terms, okay, this is where the phrase goes, where's the high point of the phrase, what happens when you have a high point in the phrase, what break it down to very basic words. Is it like more pressure on the string? Is it wider vibrato? Is it flatter hair? Break it down so you actually know what it actually means. It means it can mean so general to just have a high point in the phrase. What does it actually mean technically, right?
Yes.
So once you get that down and then you actually feel it and you're able to feel what you play, that's yeah, like going back to what we just talked about. So yeah,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
beautifully played,
yeah,
beautifully said. Yes, it's
yeah,
like once you know how to execute it, you can do it anytime
right,
you feel the inclination to do it.
exactly.
Yes, I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
How
Again, it's
about
it's again, it's easier said than done, right?
that's why we have to practice, right?
Exactly.
How
Yeah.
about finding this balance with um that's another question I get a lot is okay, so many programs, concerts, different things, and how does one find balance in one's life? And I have a lot of opinion on this topic, but before I say anything, I'd be curious to hear what that looks like for you.
Life like outside of music?
Yeah, the whole thing, how it comes
Yeah, the
together
house
for you.
thing. Okay, okay. First of all, I'm lucky to have a supportive wife. She comes to all the concerts, and she also is able to stand my practicing while she's working. So super lucky to have that, and to have her as a sounding board, to kind of express, whatever I'm going through. Us musicians, we kind of almost live in our heads sometimes, and it's healthy to have, a support system that helps us get through it.
Yeah.
But in terms of balancing life, honestly, for me, it obviously surrounds, what I do in my career and to kind of fill things that I enjoy doing besides just the violence. So I would say these last few weeks have been actually like, if I were to say an ideal succession of weeks, this would be it because beginning of April, I performed and recorded the Ranchbarn Concerto. The next week, I played Mendelssohn Violin Concerto just outside of Boston. Now 2 weeks in a row playing here in Buffalo, Dvorak 6, Mendelssohn Talon, and next week playing with my brother, Bach Double in Winnipeg. So just having that diversity of playing, whether it's concerto playing, orchestral playing, and stuff with my brother, and to fill it in with I guess what we like to do. Me and my wife, we like to visit coffee shops. We enjoy just kind of exploring different neighborhoods, and meeting up with friends. So that's it's a healthy balance. So everybody has their own balance. I guess I like watching basketball as well, so that keeps me up at night. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
find balance to be such an interesting topic because I think if we aim to achieve it perfectly,
Yeah.
then we lack balance. I feel that it's a balancing act most of the time.
That's true, actually. What is balance? Because you can never have, so it's either you have too much work or you don't have enough, right? You have nothing,
Yep.
right? It's either or, but then trying to make the most out of either or situation. Let's say you have a lower time of the season, what can you use it to kind of balance out the rest of it? Maybe attend, more fitness classes, cook a little bit more and stuff like that. And if you're really busy, how can you, I guess, find time to kind of, reset, recharge, and all that. So, yeah, like you said, it's a balancing act than finding balance.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes. Thank you
yeah,
for sharing this. Very
yeah.
helpful. Nikki, I love these questions from the rapid fire. So
Sure,
do you mind if we jump into
of
that?
course. Yeah.
Awesome. Let's see. Which ones do we be? Okay, I love this question. What thought or belief has changed your life, or a thought or belief that helps supporting you?
I don't know where I read it, but I'm sure it's been said many times. It's like the quote saying, it's about the process.
Mm-hmm.
So, don't think too much about where it begins, where it ends, but everything in between. And as long as it's like a forward motion, you learn about it every day, the destination kind of comes and goes as you move through that, through this train, whether it's fast, slow, medium speed, doesn't matter. You're going to go past, different tent poles. So
Mm-hmm.
it's about the process and trying to, extract as much as you can with what you have. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
I love that. A big thing for me is finding ways to make practicing enjoyable. Now we know practicing is also work, but
Yep.
there are ways to make it feel more fulfilling, more enjoyable, and in my opinion, that makes it more effective. So,
Yep.
what are some ways that you make it enjoyable for yourself?
Enjoyable and definitely have a nice cup of coffee beside your beside your music stand. And for me, it's dividing finding a balancing act within your practice session. There's gonna be periods where it's gonna be intense, detailed work, working on, let's say, a difficult passage like we talked about earlier. But also there are times where you got to score study, and that's also work too. Sometimes we kind of, push that aside, but that's part of practicing your practicing session. And to also leave time, not every day, but sometimes I leave, half an hour, 45 minutes to just kind of enjoy and play, to just kind of not lose sight of, the enjoyment of playing. Because sometimes I get really into, let's say, figure out, just problem solving, a page or two of something. And, I come out of there like, oh my God, like, so then, if I just kind of go back, play some Bach or play something that, passage from the Beethoven concerto, it just kind of resets me, just gives me a breath of fresh air.
Mm,
So, yeah.
I love that. How about a favorite tool in the practice room?
Ooh, it is technically my phone, but I need to remember to kind of turn it on airplane mode or something because otherwise I'll like sometimes notification. But it's got my tuner, it's got my metronome. It's got I can record on it, and play it back if I need to, rapidly if I need to just check on how something sounds. So yeah, so I would say my phone.
And check the basketball score once in a
Yeah,
while.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What is a habit that you have that, supports you that you find supports you in your success?
Ooh, a habit that I have. I think my wife would answer that question better. I would say maybe to kind of run, no matter how big the pressure is, no matter how looming that concert or that audition or that performance might be. just kind of downplay it, just to make it feel like every day. So I try to run my mind, my habits, as though it's just another day. Just
Mm,
create as normal a situation as possible, so I don't, you know, I guess get stuck into my head too much. So yeah,
I
I don't
love
know if
that.
that answers your question, but
No,
I
I love this. I've
yeah.
never had this answer on the show before, and it's so great. It's like you put things back in perspective all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Um,
It's just another day, and just things move on. Yeah.
I love that. Um, what skills do you think young musicians studying today should acquire in addition to learn to play their instruments?
In addition to just playing instruments, I would say, I mean, again, just the topic of being adaptable, right? Like being adaptable to the environment that you're in, being able to adapt to people that you're in, because music making, playing an orchestra, playing in chamber music, being a soloist, being this or that, you at the end of the day, it's about people, right? So
Mhm.
having social skills, people skills. You can be an introvert, but that doesn't mean you're closed off or anything. It's just how you carry yourself and being approachable and all that. So I think just finding what you're comfortable with, and don't go out of the way and doing something that seems completely unnatural, but I think it's still an important skill to have to be able to relate and communicate with people. Yeah,
Yeah, I love
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Finally, how about a quick actionable tip that the listeners could implement today in their musical lives?
um, quick actionable tip. I would say, I think every experience that you have in life, whether it's through music, whether it's through music making or through life in general, it all kind of comes together, into how you approach the instrument, how you perform, right? It's more of a, I'm not sure if I'm communicating it properly, but how you play is how you are as a person. So, like if you go through something and experience, it reflects in your playing as well. So, take that in with an open arm, like just take it all in, and let yourself evolve and let yourself grow as a human being, and that will in turn help you grow as an artist as well.
Mm,
Yeah.
really well said. Nikki, tell us everything about where we can catch you soon. So you just mentioned Bach Double,
Yeah.
then the Santa Fe's coming up. I'm sure there's some
Yeah.
really fun things in Buffalo coming up, the
Yeah.
upcoming recording release, everything.
Yeah. Sure. I guess immediately I'm playing a concert with my brother in Winnipeg with the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra. So that's Bach double, and we have this fantastic Canadian composer, David Baird, composed interludes in between the Bach double movements. So one based on, I guess, a bohemian styled riff, and then in between the first and second movement, and in between second and third movement, something a little bit more jazzy. So just something to change it up. So we'll see how it all comes together on Tuesday during the rehearsal.
So
So
did you practice that more than the Bach Double?
uh, honestly, just to get a hang of it, yeah, just to see what. Honestly, I can't. It's a little hard to imagine it right now without Timmy, without my brother.
Hmm.
So we're gonna get a start on it this weekend, just to put it together before we put it together with the orchestra. So
Very
I think
good.
that'll be more clarifying. So yeah, concert's gonna be next week, and then what's happening after then? I'm doing the last two performances here in with the Buffalo Philharmonic. We're doing Genestera and then Heldenleben, and Heldenleben to close the season. So
Nice.
that's gonna be fun to do. And then it's gonna be the opera season in Santa Fe, which is gonna be my first summer there, and I'll be performing La Boheme, Turn Up the Screw, Marriage of Figaro, and The Valkyrie. So super
Oh,
excited for those four operas.
so
And
many of my favorites on that list.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'm really looking forward to just being in that environment. Santa Fe itself is gorgeous. I've been there for just a couple days at a time, never for an extensive period. So I'm excited to kind of just live and breathe that part of the world a little bit for the summer.
That's
And
amazing.
then yeah, so that takes us all the way till the end of summer. So it's gonna be fun and exciting.
That sounds great. I'm going to put all
Yeah,
of the information on where to find you in the show notes of the episode, so I hope people check it out.
sure.
And so I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show. It's always so fun to, speak with you and hear your perspective on things. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Renee. Pleasure to be here, and thanks for having me.